gathering is our Sangha, and all the warmness of your friendship and the greeting, it just is lovely. It's why we're here, to be supported, and it is one of the jewels of the path, the Sangha, the community. So as many of you know, this is the first time that I manifest in this seat as the teacher. And I assure you that I have spent 3 weeks being very mindful of anxiety, fear, terror, anxiety, fear. Oh my gosh. So I just really come to you from my heart and ask in advance that you forgive me if this talk doesn't have quite the coherence that I would like it to have. Because by the time I actually finished, it's a book. So, right? This is like perhaps chapters of a book. This one, that one, that one. And I have about 40 minutes, and I'd like to make this truly a relaxed and easygoing, light Dharma talk. So for those of you who may not know, the title of my Dharma talk is The Shady Side of the Sunny Side. And you probably know that in the wonderfulness of the discoveries that we can change our brains. This is like revolutionary compared to what we thought of for hundreds of years. What was in this brain was set at an early age. We now know from the science of neuroplasticity that this brain can be changed. Well, this is very good news. And it's also true that the evolutionary process of bringing us to this very day defaults to the negative. That's what the little phrase is. We default to the negative because when we were back there in the Stone Age, the deal was survive or die, right? And we were much more alert to the stick than the carrot. The stick got you no carrot, right? No lunch. And that is how it seems to be that this part of the brain is always trolling the ground for something to keep us safe. What's not going to keep me safe? But here we are in the 21st century with this fantastic newer part of our brain. We are relatively safe. We have shelter, we have food. And the science began to recognize that perhaps we can do something to move the light from this part of the brain which is worrying, anxious, stressful, to the kind of the brain that these Olympic meditators have when these experiments first began in the neuroscientific laboratories. So there was this wonderful collaboration of the Dalai Lama and some scientists who had the opportunity to see in real time that not only to start off with at a baseline did these meditators have a much larger left prefrontal cortex than most anybody else, but when they would do loving kindness meditation, for example, this area of the brain would light up, bam, bam, bam. And this part of the brain, this left prefrontal cortex here, is the one that makes us feel good and open-hearted and caring and compassionate. The right side of this part of the brain actually is the one that gets a bit depressed, not so happy. So this is all really good news. We, by doing certain practices, we can change our brains. And in the wake of this, as things happen in our country, we are such a innovative, juicy kind of people. What can we do with this good news? Well, we have produced what is known as the happiness industry. And if you were to be interested in this, just go to the web, and you will be astonished at how much there is out there. There are what are often called the sort of quick fixes, just a click of the button, and you can raise your happiness score 5 points. Now, I make light of this, and I don't mean in any way to demean what I think has a lot of good and can help a lot of people. The movement that was called positive psychology realized, hey, we don't only have to focus on what's wrong with people, let's encourage people looking for what's good. But my sense is that the pendulum has swung so far over to the one side, and we are all in this business of happifying. There's a new word. It says happify. So I think that there's some, at least 3 shades of, or three shady sides to this sunny side. It is good news. It's wonderful. We have science. We have, the innovative games and activities, and I get, at least 3 different things that I've signed on to since I began to explore this. I get all these messages every day. I can do all sorts of things. But I began to have a certain unease about this. One of the things that I feel is that it's an oversimplification. Because happiness, like most all emotions, are very complex. And there is this continuum. You can feel just a little bit okay one day, but do we always have to be happy? Which is kind of the message that I've been getting from this. Happify. The other thing that is of concern to me is that there's a certain splitting off. So there are, instead of us being this whole, this rich human being with the whole range of emotional flavors, we have the ability to feel sadness. When there is a cause for sorrow, it's part of our deep humanity to feel. Now, I'm not saying that we must in any way turn away from what is important in terms of people who have depression. That needs to be taken to a doctor of the psyche. This is quite in the other area where there are just these wonderful normal feelings, a richness of emotion, grief, regret, melancholy. Are these negative emotions? I don't think so. And I want to embrace them because we have from all these wonderful feeling states incredible works of art and poetry and music. So that's one of my difficulties with the pendulum that's going too far over one side, splitting off into this positive emotions and negative emotions, and you must keep going over to that side. Another area that I'm really concerned about is that what we practice in this path, which has such longevity, it's 2,500 years old, the teachings of the Buddha, it's kind of been diluted. Some things are taken out of context. But besides that, one of the 3 poisons that Pat spoke to last week is this grasping, this going after things that we do all the time. We get addicted to things. We want this. And so I'm aware of a certain, it's sort of like an excessive striving. You need to pursue happiness. And I think that's a problem. So another really big and important shade of the sunny side for me, which is part of my personal story, is what happens to these not so happy emotions, especially the ones like anger, fear. Where do they go? Because there isn't one among us who doesn't at times feel anger or fearful. And in my case, there was a tremendous amount of suppression and repression of all that was deemed a negative emotion in my family of origin. So, the last, I guess I did say the three. The one was this is sort of a happiness frenzy, things have gotten out of balance, let's bring it back into a sort of moderation. The other thing is the suppression and repression of quote-unquote negative emotions. And the third is that there's this sort of watering down of what is a comprehensive path. And this comprehensive path is built on an extremely solid foundation. There's certain things that we know are what is needed for a house to be built up. We have the wisdom piece of the Dharma. The Dharma are the teachings, the path, the way that the Buddha gave us. Another one is the meditation part, right? And the third part, I've gotten a complete blank, so anybody help? I have notes, but it's what happens when you do a little bit. Your ethical foundation, thank you so much. So we've got the ethics, we've got wisdom, and we've got meditation. And it's from this that our happiness grows. I think in recollection of what is troubling to my heart and to all of us probably is the endless repetition of violence, from small scale to large scale. Pat so eloquently addressed these non-ending sources of conflict. And, being a person of the Jewish faith, every time there is a new eruption in the Middle East, I just have to hold my heart for the agony of what I feel is the recycling over and over of what is undigested, what has not been processed, of the very same repression and persecution and discrimination that Jews felt for thousands and thousands of years, well, maybe hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So it grieves me deeply. One of the quotes that I found from the Buddha, he says, "A man may plunder as he will. When others plunder in return, he, plundered, plunders them again. The wheel of deeds turns round again and makes the plundered plunderers." So I, as you may now have guessed, am not homegrown in this country. And I come from South Africa. And Nelson Mandela is one of my heroes. And this is one of the quotes from Nelson Mandela. He says, "Until I changed myself, I could not change others." And herein for me is where I can perhaps participate in a change, because I think that if each and every one of us do this practice, we may be able, in our inner worlds, in the small parts of our family, our relationships, in our small communities, to have other ways of being rather than perpetuating this often, so very often, undigested, suppressed, put down, not understood parts of ourselves that are so painful sometimes that we don't want to know them. I have a lovely quote from Jung. Carl Jung said, "Projection changes the world into the replica of one's own unknown face." So if I have got all this unknown anger within me, fear within me, and I've pushed it down and I'm suppressing it, it will be projected out there. All is not so gloomy about my talk. And unfortunately, I could not get a song to sing for you out of Jackie's wonderful speakers. But I want to tell you about my father. I was in the car the other day, and News of the World was just so bad that I switched from 88.5, that's my go-to station, I hear all the news, and on 89.7, there was this old American jazz, and Billie Holiday was singing a song. Anybody guess what the song is? Thank you. On the sunny side of the street. Do you remember this song? Some of you are too young to know this. But the words are, I used to walk in the shade with those blues on parade, but I'm not afraid. My rover crossed over. If I never have a cent, I'll be rich as Rockefeller, with gold dust and my feet on the sunny side of the street. This is not going to be up on the air right now. I grew up with a father who had so much of the sunny side that it was an incredible way for me to know a certain kind of happiness. I mean, I don't know too many who woke up in the morning to a father opening up the curtains and saying, "Oh, what a beautiful morning, oh, what a beautiful day." He was that kind of a person. But there was a shadow to my father. We lived in South Africa. I was born in 1947. In 1948, the nationalist government had taken over and begun the insidious institutionalization of one of the worst kinds of discrimination based on the color of a person's skin. Apartheid. And with all the evil, all of the horror of it, we never spoke about this. And any attempt to speak about it was very quickly quieted down there. You don't want to make us unsafe by speaking too loudly about these things. You don't understand these things. Especially to my mother, who was a very impassioned woman, and she used to have this real, righteous rage and anger coming out, and my father said, "No, We don't talk like that in our family. Well, my dad, he had a raving lunatic of a mother. She really, unfortunately, had mental illness, which was never diagnosed. But she was not a kind woman. And I think he made a certain agreement with himself. I'm not going to ever allow conflict. I'm not going to allow us to raise our voices. If you can't say something nice about a person, don't say anything at all, which is actually terrific right speech. Yeah, my father was a Bodhi, but he had the shadow. And he was stoical too. And when he began to have a cognitive decline and a physical decline, he went into absolute silence of suffering. So that was my dad. And there's my mom. And I should just add on the other piece, 1948 now, the news of the world is coming into South Africa. We didn't have TV, so we didn't see the horrors of the concentration camps, of the gas chambers. But my family, like many Jewish families, lost relatives to this Holocaust. Did we talk about this? Not much. I once said to my mother, I want to know where my roots, where did I come from? Tell me about my grandmother. She said, I don't know anything. Because when I asked my mother, she said, I can't talk about it. It was too horrible. So all this silence, this shutting down, this repression of things. And then I add just one more tragic story, which is that my parents lost their firstborn child at the age of 2. I never knew I had this brother until I was about 12. And it was only when my mother was 89 years of age, to my questions asking her, she said that she had carried guilt her whole life for not being able to help this little boy when he had been taken to the hospital at a time where a mother could only visit twice a week for 1 hour. Her powerlessness, her anger, her frustration, her sorrow, we didn't grieve. So I grew up with so much of myself unknown to myself because these things come through, they live in one, that I had to do a lot of work. At times I've needed to go to psychotherapy for this. At times I've needed to do trauma work for what lives in my system, undigested. But the most important transformative practice is this path, this meditation practice. And it is a function of time. Sometimes you don't think that anything's happening and you say, oh, I'm sitting, nothing's happening. But time is one of the most precious ingredients to acknowledge. It works its way deep, deep, deep underneath the surface. You cannot see, but slowly things begin to percolate up. And then we can see them, and then we can work with them. And the most important practice of meditation is the mindfulness. That gem, that mindfulness, it is shining a light of awareness. And when we practice mindfulness, we do this with kindness, with compassion, with this friendliness of our heart, so that no matter what is there when we sit, we have no preference. We allow. with this kindness. And just that sometimes is all that's needed over time for these things to bubble and ease, for great insights to come. And the insights is what we get the name of what we here as a Sangha are, Insight Meditation Community of Charlottesville. This path is about learning who we are so that we don't take this unknown face out. We know this face, we know well. And then we become to get less and less reactive. So my mom, with all of the difficulties that she faced, she had this wonderful sunny disposition as well. She did wonderful things. She went here, she went there. But every now and then, she would erupt. It was like confusing and frightening. And she would, dispense punishments that were totally out of proportion to the small deed. But that's our reactivity when we don't own all of the emotions, including the ones that are sometimes called the orphans of consciousness. The grumpiness, the irritability. We need to just be for what is when we sit down, when we walk around in our life. And we do mindfulness not just on the cushion, on the chair, but we do it in our activities, in our life. I guess, as you know, I haven't given you much of the quotes of the Dharma that I wanted to give you. But I just felt like I wanted to lay out the ground from whence I deeply, deeply share the good of this practice toward an enduring, growing lifetime of happiness versus the happy-fi thing. So just with a little reverence to some of the wonderful teachers of the Dalai Lama has to be an incarnation of what this happiness is. We look at him, we see this wonderful, giving, gentle, smiling man. And he says, I believe that the very purpose of life is to seek happiness. And he says that happiness can be achieved through the training of the mind. So this is what I've been trying to address, that this practice is a training of the mind. And another one of the ways that I wanted to just quickly tell you from these great and illustrious voices, boom, 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 yes, here we go, is from the Buddha himself. And this little piece that I'm going to read you is a wonderful example of the oral tradition through which the Buddha taught. And it has a certain rhythmic repetitiveness, and there are these contrasts. So the Buddha would say, this is skillful, this is not skillful, and there's this wonderful repetition because that's how people could learn when we didn't have my notes to go to. So here we go. This was called the Kalama Sutta. The Kalamas was a group of people, a tribe, a village, I don't quite know. So it goes like this. So as I said, you can just imagine the Buddha sitting down. He was a real live man. He was a prince and he was a great sage. But he was a real live person. And all of these devotees, these bhikkhus, these monks, but not only are the monks bhikkhus, we too are the bhikkhus. If you take a sincere step onto this path, we are the bhikkhus and the bhikkhunis and the yogis and the yoginis on this path. So here's he said. So, as I said, the Kalamas, don't go by reports, by legends, by traditions, by scripture, by logical conjecture, by inference, by analogies, by agreement, through pondering views, by probability, or by the thought, this contemplative is our teacher. When you know for yourselves that these qualities are unskillful, these qualities are blameworthy, these qualities are criticized by the wise, these qualities, when adopted and carried out, lead to harm and suffering, then you should abandon them. Thus was it said. And in reference to this was it said, and then the whole first part is repeated again. He said, don't go by reports, don't go by legends, by traditions, by scriptures, by logical conjectures. You can get the whole thing being repeated. And he says, after, when you know for yourselves, that's the most important thing, you know? The Buddha said, don't listen to me, don't listen to anybody. When you know for yourselves that these qualities are skillful, these qualities are blameless, these qualities are praised by the wise, these qualities, when adopted and carried out, lead to welfare and happiness. Then you should enter and remain in them. So it's kind of a nice way of thinking about happiness. And I prefer it to this one, if I can find it. On one of the websites, there's this guy sitting there, and the caption at the bottom says, happiness is deceptively simple. It's about being satisfied with life and experiencing more positive emotions than negative ones. Right? It's not so simple. In the last few minutes that I have left, I would like to just end and say that I have both the smiley and the non-smiley within me. There is both the shady and the sunny, the natural order of the yang and the yin, night and day. Splitting off any part of us leaves us less whole. If Athens of ancient Greece was the epicenter, we could say, of happiness, there was a bed that you had to lie on the way to Athens. It was called the Procrustean bed. And you were placed on this bed, and you had to fit in order to get into the gateway. And if you were too short, well, you were just stretched, you know. Very painful, like a torture rack, you know, was stretched. And if you were too tall, well, you just lop off whatever was necessary so that you fit. And so my hope is that we know that who we are, this whole, doesn't fit into any category, any bed. This quote comes from Mark Nepo. He says, before the Western mind regarded happiness as an inalienable right, and therefore saw pain and sadness as unnatural sediments to be rid of, aliveness and woundedness were viewed as aspects of life dependent upon each other in order to access something deeper than happiness. Aliveness and woundedness inform each other. When we dare to keep things whole and live together, aliveness and woundedness appear as inevitable wings which, working as one, can help us find each other. I think this is enough. So the next time I fill in a slot when none of the teachers are available, I won't have to start from the beginning. I can just go to, oh, here's this thing about anger. I have a whole chapter about that and so forth. But I thought what we could do together is sit for a moment and to generate the loving friendliness, both to ourselves, to each other, and to many others by this practice of loving kindness meditation. So make yourselves just comfortable, sit back, and if you wish to close your eyes, just take a few breaths, settling back. And bring to mind from this day, from the week, from any time that you can bring to mind one example of your own kindness or someone else's kindness to you. Just take a moment to filter through and find one act, one word, one gesture that you bestowed upon another or was given to you. And allow the feeling tone of this kindness, a reflection of your inherent goodness, the inherent goodness of all of us, to be as a drop of food coloring in a clear glass of water. And let it just ripple through your whole being, filling up the entire space of this feeling being. This quality of kindness, friendliness, benevolence, goodness, which is our innate, given, loving presence. And from this place, let us wish to ourselves, to each other, and to the rippling out circles of our community, our state, our country, and beyond to all the countries of the world, all the peoples, all the animals, all the fish, the creatures, the birds, all beings like you and I wish to be happy, to be safe, to be well, to be free. And take a moment, dropping that into your heart center and letting it ripple through your entire being and out and out and out. Go in peace, go in kindness. I thank you very much for your attention and for your support. I felt just this incredible gift of both my friends known and my friends unknown that held me in a place where from time to time I felt really lost. And I just paused to know this support, both from you and as my teacher and friend Pat reminded me, from all the teachers and all of the beings who have been on this path and are with us from the past. Good night. Thank you.